Yo everybody, welcome to the video. We got some pro revenge stories today. I hope y'all enjoy. Let's get to it. HOA President's long goodbye, posted on behalf of a friend who was on Reddit. This is for you, Jake. This is posted by BB Keys. When I moved into my suburban neighborhood, I expected peace and quiet. Instead, I walked into a petty dictatorship run by our HOA president, Todd. Todd was the worst kind of leader, the kind who loved power but hated accountability. He enforced ridiculous rules like fining people $200 for leaving their trash cans out a minute past 9 a.m. What? But blatantly ignored the rules when it suited him. His own yard was a mess of unpermitted structures, and his fence was taller than allowed by city ordinances. But Todd's true sin? Using the HOA as his personal piggy bank. At first, I tried reasoning with him. My fence was slightly off color because the approved stand wasn't available, and he fined me $500. I explained, provided receipts, and asked for leniency. Todd smirked, said, "Rules are rules," and walked away. That's when I decided I would take him down. Not with screaming or public arguments, but methodically, legally, in a way he'd never recover from. Step 1. Become the inside man. Todd's first mistake was underestimating me. I volunteered for the HOA board under the guise of wanting to get involved in the community. I played the part of the eager, naive newbie perfectly. For 2 years, I attended every meeting, quietly observing how Todd operated. I learned he controlled the board by bullying other members and burying them in paperwork. He pushed through votes with only his allies were present and conveniently lose paperwork submitted by dissenting homeowners. I kept my head down, took detailed notes, and waited. My goal was to outlast his term as president so I could begin making changes. Then I discovered Todd's second mistake. He wasn't just a bully, but a thief. Step 2. Follow the money. Todd loved to brag about how he kept the HOA's finances in order, but something didn't add up. The annual HOA fees were high, much higher than in similar neighborhoods, but the common areas were falling apart. The pool was closed half the summer due to maintenance issues, and the landscape looked like it hadn't been touched in months. I started digging. As the HOA treasurer, Todd had access to all the accounts, but he was notoriously cagey about sharing financial details. I asked for the budget during a meeting, and Todd laughed it off, saying, "Don't worry, I got it under control." I filed a formal request for the financial records, which, under HOA rules, he was required to provide. Weeks went by with no response. That's when I started talking to neighbors. Turns out, I wasn't the only one suspicious. Over a dozen homeowners had requested access to the budget over the years, only to be ignored. One neighbor claimed Todd had used HOA funds to install a new patio at his house, while others swore he'd seen Todd's kids at the community pool during its maintenance closures. Armed with these suspicions, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, forcing Todd to provide the records. He stalled, but I wasn't backing down. Step 3. Build the case. When Todd finally handed over financial documents, they were a mess. Invoices were missing, payments were mislabeled, and some expenses were downright bizarre. A $15,000 landscaping fee paid to a company that didn't exist? Thousands spent on administrative costs with no explanation. I cross-referenced the HOA's bank statements with public records and found the smoking gun. Todd was funneling money to his personal accounts. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Even better, I discovered Todd had been inflating contractor fees, pocketing the difference, and splitting the profits with his buddies. A shady contractor who handled most of the HOA's maintenance. I compiled everything into a detailed report, complete with spreadsheets, photos, and notarized statements from neighbors who had seen Todd's antics firsthand. Stage 4, the coup. I waited for the annual HOA meeting, which was typically a snooze fest attended by only a handful of homeowners, but this time I made sure people showed up. I spent weeks knocking on doors, explaining what Todd had been up to. I didn't share everything, but just enough to keep people angry and curious. On the night of the meeting, the room was packed. Todd started the meeting like usual, droning on about how difficult it was to manage the HOA and how much he'd sacrificed for the community. That's when I stood up. I calmly asked if he could explain some discrepancies in the budget. Todd laughed nervously and said, "I don't think this is the time or place." I replied, "Actually, Todd, it's the perfect time." I handed out copies of my report to everyone in the room. The mood shifted instantly. People started reading, whispering, and then shouting. Todd tried to regain control, but it was too late. I called for a vote to remove him as president. By the end of the night, Todd was out. Hey, nice. Step 5, the final blow. After Todd was removed, we hired an independent auditor to go through the HOA's finances. They confirmed everything. Todd had embezzled over $50,000. Jesus. This managed tens of thousands more and committed multiple counts of fraud. We reported him to the police and filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. Ooh. But it didn't end there. Todd's shady contractor buddy was also exposed and banned from doing business in the county. Todd had to sell his house to pay restitution and legal fees. His name became a running joke in the neighborhood, and no one would touch him professionally. With Todd gone, we restructured the HOA to prevent another dictator from taking over. We implemented term limits, required multiple board members to approve financial decisions, and created an online portal to all homeowners can access budgets and meeting minutes. The aftermath. Every time I walk past Todd's old house, now owned by a lovely family, I smile. The pool is open, the landscape is beautiful, and the HOE fees are lower than ever. Todd, meanwhile, moved to a neighboring town where he reportedly tried to join another HOA board, only to be laughed out the room when someone Googled his name. Justice wasn't just served, it was plated, garnished, and savored. Dude, I love a good, like, revenge story. That's just great. Bro got absolutely demolished. That's so awesome. This post is by broad_ADZ. Cheat on your wife with mine, I'll burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect my wife was up to something. Our two kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young that we couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself, but since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day. She wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar, so I started tracking the mileage in her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. Dang. And one day I sat down at the computer and she left a sticky note with her AOL password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF where they discussed how my wife was regularly hooking up with one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. No mention of details about him other than my wife was also talking crap about his wife, making fun of how she's gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times/dates and locations, all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go meet this guy for lunch. Then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. Yeah, my boy, you get it. My parents cheated on each other and the fallout absolutely screwed mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, Bob, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out he worked as a vice president of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife serve with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with the guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information of my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bob was fired. And since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife live, he was also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly, lots of fighting, in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bob on the internet anymore these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. Yeah, good for her, good for her. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. Real, my boy. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kid's mom and important to them. Nothing beyond that. Yeah, I mean, Bro did good. Honestly, that was the GOAT right there. I honestly, I know I would have screwed up big time. I wouldn't have done all that. I would have been pissed. We reversed gazumped a greedy landlord, and it was glorious. Gazumping occurs when an agent or seller accepts an offer you make to buy property at an agreed price, but the property is sold to someone else. This usually happens when the vendor sells the property for a higher amount. This happened 15 years ago, and it is one of the proudest moments of my life. My best friend and her husband have 5 kids together. They lived in an expensive city and rented an old 4-bedroom house for $400 per week. The house was very run down, with a disgusting kitchen and stinky drains, but it was all they could afford at the time. Still, they made it work. The owner was a nice old lady who was extremely wealthy and very fond of my friend. She froze the rent for 5 years and promised to let them buy the house once they had saved enough to get a loan from the bank, as she had helped other people in a similar way. They knew they could trust her, and so they saved every cent they could. It took them 5 years, but they finally told her they were ready. 2 days later, the nice old lady passed away before anything was put in writing. Enter the new owners, the lady's 4 children, each extremely wealthy in their own right. They inherited a huge portfolio of properties. When they first spoke to my friends, they assured them that the sale would still go through, but they would have to wait until probate had settled. Confident, my friends started making some changes to the place. They started by stripping wallpaper, painting, and making plans. Finally, probate was settled and the owners agreed to go ahead with the sale for the previously agreed price. My friends applied for the loan, but to their shock, it was refused. The owners had raised the asking price by $80,000. What? Without telling my friends, to make things even worse, the house would be put on the open market in 7 days. There'd be an open house, and with the market the way it was probably sell immediately. My friends were devastated. They might be able to borrow enough, but it went longer than a week to get. To make matters worse, property prices had soared recently, and rent had gone up a whole lot while there had been frozen. Not only were my friends struggling to get the money if the place was sold to someone else, and they were asked for a higher rent or were evicted, it'd be nearly impossible to find an affordable place with more than 2 bedrooms. I was scared for my friends, but I was also incandescently angry. Those greedy sods were some of the wealthiest people in the city. They were screwing over a struggling family for less than $20,000 each. They didn't even need the money. It was pure greed, and it was obvious so that they'd already planned to do this. So while my friends scrambled to come up with the money, I started plotting. I looked up advice on what helps to make a sale. We needed to make the place as undesirable as possible without making my friends look like the bad tenants. Uncluttered, we moved all the furniture in from the walls, added some extra furniture and borrowed ornaments, and hung a load of motorcycle memorabilia on the walls. The place felt smaller. Smell, my friend boiled a head of cabbage on the stove, and we sprayed ammonia around in front and back doors. It smells like all the neighborhood cats have been marking their territory. We also poured 24 rotten eggs down the drain to make it smell like sewer gas. Neighborhood. We attained a moldy old couch and dumped in front yard of the neighbor across the road with permission, of course. Neighbor times 2, we started calling friends for help. Anyone with a loud and crappy car was asked to do a few laps in front of the block during the open day. The street was unusually busy that day. Everyone we knew found a reason to drive by. It was practically rush hour. Neighborhood 3, we called out mates from the rugby club, full contact football without any of the soft padding. Ow. A big portion of our club were very large men. The next door neighbor would set up a barbecue in their front yard, and we offered free food and cheap beer. They came on motorcycles wearing their roughest gear. There was quite a crowd. A lot of people showed up from the open day. Quite a few more were in and out within minutes. One lady sat in her car and watched the party next door for driving away. The one bloke who stayed any length of time was brave enough to start up a conversation with someone leaving the party. He asked if they were often there and was told every couple weeks or so. They had an after party morning, and the party the night before was 3 doors up. The party goer also helpfully mentioned the troublesome drains that are always getting blocked by tree roots and stinking up the place. The potential buyer left without making an offer. So my friends were the only ones to make an offer. They still had to pay more than they planned, but not as much as the greedy bastards wanted. My friends signed the paper and paid the deposit that day, so when the brave buyer put in an offer of $30,000 more than my friends, there was nothing the owners could do about it. Strict anti-gazumping laws. I would have loved to see the owners' faces when they found out. For all the people who were saying they had cheap rent, they didn't. $400 was the rent in 2004, and it was pretty high back then. By the time the lady died, average rent for a house that size had only gone out about $40. Nowadays, 4-bedroom houses in that area go for approximately $800 a week. What? Oh my god. Dude, that's just messed up though. When like, I don't know, you think these people would try to like honor their mother's, you know, like wishes and like actually help these guys? Greedy people are just, you know, they're just wrong, man. I don't know, it's just messed up. All right, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. We had some pretty good stories today. If y'all did, please like, subscribe, and comment down below, and I hope to see y'all next time. Peace.